how do we make critical thinkers? How do we get people to get out of their own ways and say, yes, we have X equals Y, but sometimes it's Z and sometimes it's 5 and sometimes it's Christmas,
Welcome back to the Prospecting Show, where each week we talk about tips, tricks, and methods for growing an amazing small business pipeline. I'm your host, Dr. Connor Robertson, and on this podcast, you can expect segments on communication, sales, prospecting, and closing. Thank you to everyone who has supported my 100 episodes and the 100 days goal going into 2020. Enjoy the show. Today we have on the podcast Matthew DiMond, Dr. Matthew DiMond, and he is a chiropractor. And just to give everyone a little bit of background, we met at New York Chiropractic somewhere between 2015 and 2017. He was a clinical advisor to me. Super great guy. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your day today.
Absolutely. Glad to be able to give back to a former student.
Absolutely. So maybe give the listeners a little bit of background on your chiropractic experience. Where did you come from? How did you get into chiropractic? And then what are you doing in the clinical educator space now?
So my story, I think, is kind of fun and unique in that I'm actually a third generation chiropractor. Wow. My grandfather was a chiropractor. My aunt and uncle are chiropractors, and I have a cousin who's a chiropractor as well.
Wow.
So, that's certainly something that I was exposed to my whole life. And, after I went through the normal undergraduate process and got some degrees, I always knew I wanted to work in the health space, but I wasn't sure exactly in what capacity. So I worked in EMS for the better part of a decade. And it was actually in that job where, the story I say is, I got tired of seeing people on their way out.
Yeah. I bet.
So, after seeing that year after year, I went, let me start looking into other fields. I really don't think medicine's a good fit for me. I don't want to work, with people who are really just hanging on to life. I really want to improve the quality of their life.
Right.
So having the family upbringing that I did, chiropractic kind of seemed like a natural choice. So when I applied to chiropractic school, I went to a few and, got accepted to a couple of them. And I ultimately ended up landing on NYCC because part of that interview process, what I found in myself was that when they asked why I wanted to be a chiropractor, it really dawned on me that I don't want to be a chiropractor. I want to teach chiropractors.
Okay.
So I had this little bit of a realization moment as I was really getting into it that, not only was I drawn to healthcare, but I was really drawn to the education of health practitioners.
Right.
And over the next 4 years, not only did I focus my efforts on becoming a chiropractor, but I also focused my efforts on really becoming an educator.
Right. And so do you think that was a different approach for you? So a lot of people probably go to chiropractic school thinking that they're going to be a practicing, chiropractor, and they're going down that pathway and they're really focusing clinical and not so much on how to teach other people, right? So with you going through the program with that different kind of pivot mindset, what do you think was different for you? Did you approach classes differently? Did you do things differently? I know you're different in general, the way you do things, which is great. But in that particular instance, how did you treat school differently, do you think, with your mindset?
I think that's a great question. The mindset of the person who, wants to help people is great because you want to help people. But my mindset was, I want to help people help people. So it was almost like a second order kind of thing. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this unless I really have ownership of everything that I'm trying to learn here.
Right.
So I think it really was a motivating tool that let me go to every single one of my classes, every one of my labs. It led me to, write for the school paper, get involved in research projects, and just really grab the reins and move hard into everything that the program had to offer.
And given that you were, you went into the program as a student and then you were an educator there, what did you see differently in that? I know it may be a shorter period of time, but what did you see differently in chiropractic transitioning very quickly there? You were a student, you got to sit and have other people, kind of give you that knowledge, give you that expertise. And then very quickly you flipped it and said, okay, well, now I'm the person who's going to disseminate that knowledge. How did you find that transition? Was it easy? Was it hard? Was it fast? Was it long? Like, how did it kind of change how did it change over time?
Well, I think to start, because the mentality going into the program was that was my end goal. One of the things that I did over 4 years was I made it a point to be a tutor. And, pretty much every course, after I finished any and every course, I went back and offered, tutoring services in those classes. And after 4 years, I kind of joked with everybody that I had tutored every class possible by the time I was done.
You're right.
So,
right.
So when I graduated, the opportunity to teach wasn't immediate. I actually went and practiced as an independent contractor first.
Okay.
I waited for my now wife to graduate from her program, and just kind of in a cosmic alignment manner,
Right.
I got the opportunity to come back to NYCC very quickly and work as a graduate associate, which was, honestly, I think NYCC did a really nice job of bringing in a new graduate and pairing them in courses and with instructors, as a graduate assist to really help facilitate and foster that growth as an educator.
Right. And so what do you think about, there's some instructors out there or some educators that have been doing it for 30 years, right? And that could be in chiropractic or any profession, right? It doesn't really matter. They've been teaching for 30 years. What do you think the difference is, right? So you got experience and then you have like the kind of new age up and coming kind of mindset. How do you see those two kind of crossing with each other when you have 50 staff members or 100 staff members working together? Do you see that as valuable, invaluable? Like what's your stance on that?
So I would actually say there's, as much as I'd want there to be a difference, what I find is that there actually isn't a difference. The people who come in, whether it's their first year or their 30th year teaching, it's really about, what their purpose is, what's driving them. And I've seen first year instructors who are just not motivated to be good teachers. They are, there's that adage of those who can and those who can't teach.
Right.
And you ask any educator about that adage and we're very quick to say, no, that's not true.
Right.
But there's a reason that exists, and it's because you get those people from industry who come to teach because they get burned out or can't make it or whatever the reason.
Right.
And then they're not very good teachers. So the motivation is very different. And then you see those similar patterns in the 30-year instructor who is just checked out. They do
They're
it,
done. Yeah.
pay that check, and it's done.
So you want to roll back just a little bit. So you're talking about the adage of the new instructor and the old instructor, right? So what how does that change though, right? So you said that you don't think there's a real big difference between the two of them because it's either you like teaching and you're good at it or you're not, right? That's really what it is. Not about how long you've been doing it is kind of what I'm hearing.
Right. So yeah, the two examples are, you see those people who are fresh from industry, fresh from practice, who come in because they're, burned out, tired, or otherwise, and their heart's not in it, so they're not very good instructors. And then you also see those 30-year doctors or educators who are just largely checked out and kind of done with it. Fortunately, on the other end of the spectrum, you get those first year educators who are just they're hungry. They want to make that big impact. They're really motivated to do well. They learn as much as they can in pedagogy and teaching, and they really look at classroom design and develop new concepts. But fortunately, that's also not lost on some of the 30-year educators who have that same passion.
Right. They could still have that. They could still be experienced and passionate, or they're really kind of mutually exclusive items, right? The length of time teaching and the quality of your skill set or quality of teaching or your passion are really independent items. And I'd say I definitely agree with you on that. Now, what do you think about the structure of education though, right? So like one of the things that I noticed going through, not necessarily just NYCC's program, but just school in general, is there's very much I say X and you say Y type approach, right? And then everybody goes through these programs, right? I went to school in Canada, so I got to have the Canadian education system and the US education system. And there are tons of differences, but one thing that's the exact same is I say X, you say Y across the board, right? Now, my problem with that is that I don't think that that's very realistic or practical long-term, right? Because like if X doesn't exist, you can't give any answer. You don't have anything to match it to. So how do you think, in your experience of education and your experience of how you teach people, how do you get around that X and Y one-to-one relationship?
So you have a little bit of personal insight to that comment, because having worked with me, you know how I try to break that down.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But for the people who maybe haven't seen kind of the way you interact with people, what would you say your kind of focus is? How do you break that apart for people, that one-to-one relationship?
Well, so the first thing I would say is, you really just have to respect it as a process. A lot of education requires that you have certain understandings and that you can pass certain metrics to guarantee that you are who you say you are, and you've received the education that you've received. Case in point, to become any licensed healthcare provider, you have to pass a board exam.
Right.
And that's just a minimum competency standard that every healthcare provider has to pass. And if you don't know for this X, there is that Y, you don't get to be licensed. Sorry.
Right.
So there's a little bit of teaching to the test or getting you through a board process that needs to be acknowledged. But once you've landed and generated kind of a foundational skill set, the next step is really that is what at like the college level and in higher education, we really want to focus on. And that's, how do we make critical thinkers? How do we get people to get out of their own ways and say, yes, we have X equals Y, but sometimes it's Z and sometimes it's 5 and sometimes it's Christmas, whatever that answer happens to be. So one of the things I'll do in my classes is I'm very transparent, and I say, look, gang, the first thing we're going to do is you need to know that X equals Y. But when we're done with that, I'm going to challenge you every step of the way.
Right. And do you think that, I was thinking about this before we did this session. I was writing down some notes about, things to ask you or comments, things I remember from our previous kind of engagements. And you're a big why guy, right? So I know I can speak to these specific scenarios of, we do research papers, or we do some study that we're looking at, or we're doing some clinical protocol or whatever it is. And then we get to the end of it, and then you throw the why, right? It's like, well, why did we do that, right? We know how we did it, and we know what we did, but why did we do it? And I think that throws a lot of people for a loop, right? They don't really know why they do it. They just kind of go, well, I was taught that way, or someone told me to do that. So how do you think that students, or not even just chiropractic, students across the board, how can they take that different mindset and be asking themselves why all the time? Because that's not built into people for some reason.
Question.
Yeah.
So let me maybe try to address it in a couple of different parts. First, asking yourself why is important, because it helps give you that direction. And more often than not, that's that critical question that's missing from so much of our intents is, why do we do things? We don't want to go from our day to day and just do it because it's what we did last time or what worked last time. And, when that works, that's nice. But in general, we're not on a factory line where everything has to be the same
Right.
pressed. And when you ask, somebody in that position, well, why are you doing this? The answer is, well, because I need to do it the exact same so that, the end result is the same.
The same. Yeah.
But the why there is, it needs to be the same.
Right. What if we frame it another way, right?
Yeah.
What if we frame it and say, do you think that the asking the question why can be taught? Can you teach people to ask that, or are they either just born with it? Do some people like you and I just say, we want to know why for everything? It's why. You see these kids, you give them a rule, and then they go, why, right? You see, a 5-year-old kid running around, why can't I do this? Why can't they ask that inherently? But then as you go through higher education, even just standard education, people stop asking why. They just go, yes, okay, perfect. I'll write that down next time. Yes, right? But the why comes back with certain people like you and I. how do we get that to other people so that we don't have just yes people all the time, or just I do X and Y? How do we get that?
Yeah, no, so that's a great way to start that conversation. In that everybody's born with a natural curiosity about the world. We look at things for the first time, and we want to know more. We naturally investigate our surroundings, and to some extent, the way that the education system is developed, unfortunately, really kind of works that out of you.
Right.
It takes that question away and says, well, regardless of what you think, here's what you need to know because we say so. So K
Right.
through 12 in the States, we teach you, you have to learn these things, you have to meet these standards, and then now we know that you know enough information to move forward.
Right.
But you know once you get past that point, it's who are the interesting people in the world, who are the ones that are changing the landscape of all of the different varied fields. It's the ones that don't settle for the education that's put right in front of them, but rather
Right.
say, well, this doesn't make sense, why am I learning it this way?
Right.
And
Right.
it's a question that as we're looking to develop critical thinkers, we absolutely need to make sure we're instilling a sense of curiosity in the person. So I think about when it comes to teaching somebody, how to address the why in their life, it's really about showing them how to remain curious, how to have a growth mindset, how to be more deliberate in what they're doing, so that they're thinking about the broader picture and not doing it just because.
Right. Right. And do you think that, now that you've been through multiple high level education institutions, both as a student and as an educator yourself, do you think that the school system is developing people to not ask why for the most part? Do you think that there's this compliance in just saying, do this all the time to get the same result because there's an exam, because there's a test, because we want you to answer it this way? Do you think the system's just designed that way and that's the way it's going to be successful? Or do you think there's room for improvement on that? Because I think some people would say that that's just the way it is and that's the way it should be. Is, if I say the answer is A, the answer is A, and that's just the way it is.
Mhm.
What do you think?
So I think primary school does that a little bit, but almost out of necessity. You can't let a 12-year-old have be as so mindful when it comes to things like mathematics.
Sure.
You need to have foundational knowledge
Absolutely.
in certain subjects, so that once you have a foundation from which to move from, now you can start to see what those barriers are and expand and move forward.